If you have a snack nearby, grab it. This one is going to take a while. I'm not the kind of man who talks about his personal life. Ask anyone who knows me and they'll tell you the same thing. I keep my circle small, my mouth shut, and my business to myself. I grew up watching my father handle everything quietly. Problems, disappointments, the kind of hurt that would make other men fold. He handled it all with the same flat expression and steady hands. I always admired that about him. Figured I'd inherited it. Turns out I had, just not in the way I expected. My name doesn't matter. What matters is that I spent 21 years married to a woman I would have walked through fire for. We met in Columbus, Ohio at a mutual friend's cookout in the summer of 2001. She was there with her cousin. I was there because my buddy kept insisting I needed to stop spending every weekend working overtime. She laughed at something across the yard, and I heard it before I saw her. Genuine laugh. The kind that doesn't care who's listening. I introduced myself 20 minutes later, and by the end of the night, I had her number and a reason to actually look forward to waking up the next morning. Her name was Lee. Leanne Corbett, though she took my last name when we married in 2004. She was 30 at the time. I was 32. We bought a house in Westerville, a suburb outside Columbus, 3 years in. A real house with a real yard and all the things you picture when you're young and stupid and think love is enough to hold everything together. We had 2 daughters, Zoe, who's now 19, and Harper, who just turned 15. I built my career in commercial construction management. Lee worked as an operations director for a regional healthcare network. We weren't rich, but we were comfortable. We had a life. I want you to understand something before I go any further. I'm not telling this story because I am bitter. I'm not telling it because I want sympathy. I'm telling it because 18 months ago, I was sitting on my kitchen floor at 2 in the morning, not knowing which direction was up, and finding stories like this one. Stories from real people who had been where I was one of the few things that reminded me I wasn't losing my mind. So if you're out there in that kitchen right now, this is for you. Back to Lee. For most of our marriage, things were good. Not perfect. Good. We had the usual friction, money stress, parenting disagreements, the stretches where 2 busy people start to feel like roommates instead of partners. But we always found our way back. Or at least I thought we did. Looking back now, I can see the specific month when things started to shift. October 2022. I just didn't have the right frame for what I was seeing yet. Her company had gone through a leadership restructuring that fall. New regional VP brought in from outside somebody they'd recruited from a hospital system in Charlotte. His name was, well, I'll call him what he was. I'll call him the coward. He was 40, single, and had that particular brand of confidence that comes from never having been truly accountable to anyone. Lee mentioned him in passing a few times. Just work talk. I paid it the attention I paid most of her work talk, which is to say I listened, but I wasn't memorizing details. What I did notice was the phone. Lee had always been open with her phone. Not in a performative way, just the natural openness of someone who didn't have anything to hide. She'd hand it to me to read a funny text. Leave it face up on the counter. Forget it on the couch for hours. Starting in late October, the phone became a companion. It went everywhere with her. Bathroom. Garage. She started sleeping with it on her side of the bed instead of the nightstand across the room where it had always been. She changed the passcode. When I noticed that one and mentioned it casually, just a, "Hey, did you change this?" She said the company had pushed a security update requiring employees to use unique codes. Plausible. I accepted it. The physical distance came next. It was subtle enough that I second-guessed myself for weeks. Less eye contact during dinner, conversations that felt managed, like she was editing herself in real time. The affection between us had always been easy and natural, the kind that doesn't require scheduling. By November, it was gone. Not reduced. Gone. And when I tried to bridge the gap, she was kind about it, but not present. Like hugging someone who's already thinking about somewhere else. I told myself it was stress. The restructuring at her job was genuinely difficult. Layoffs, longer hours, political nonsense at the executive level. I told myself I was reading into things. I told myself 21 years of marriage doesn't just crack because of a few cold weeks in November. I told myself a lot of things. December is when I stopped arguing with myself. I had come home early from a site visit that got pushed, walked in through the garage, and found her in the kitchen. She didn't hear me come in. She was standing at the island with her back to me, shoulders curled forward, one hand over her mouth, laughing at something on her phone. Not a polite laugh. Not a work laugh, the kind of laugh I recognize because I used to be the one causing it. When she turned and saw me, she startled. The phone went face down on the counter in a single practice motion. She recovered fast. Asked about the site visit. Poured me a coffee. Normally. Perfectly. But my chest had already understood what my brain was still refusing to process. I didn't say anything. I made a decision standing right there at that kitchen island, coffee in hand, watching my wife's face carefully not show what it was actually showing. I decided I needed to be certain before I made a single move, and I decided that when I was certain, I was going to be ready. I called my brother the next morning, not my best friend, not a coworker. My brother, because he's the only person I know who is constitutionally incapable of running his mouth. I told him what I'd seen. He asked one question, "Are you sure?" I said no. He said then, "Find out." I found out. I won't detail every step because some of it involves methods I'd rather not catalog publicly. What I will say is that we were on a family cell plan and the call logs were accessible through our carrier account, which I'd set up and managed since 2009. I pulled 3 months of data. The same number appeared in her records with a frequency that had no innocent explanation. Dozens of contacts per week, some of them at 11 p.m., some of them at 6 a.m. I reverse searched the number. It took about 40 minutes across a few different lookup sites. It came back to a name I recognized, The Coward. I sat with that for 2 days. I won't dramatize it for you. What it feels like to have something you suspected confirmed is not dramatic. It's very quiet. It's standing in a room where all the furniture is suddenly gone. It's realizing that every ordinary moment of the last several months has had a second meaning you weren't reading. Every late meeting. Every tired evening. Every tired evening. Every time she laughed at her phone in another room. On the third day, the quiet turned into something else. I won't call it anger because anger is hot and loud, and what I felt was neither. It was cold and it was thorough and it was the beginning of a plan. I have a friend I'll call Weston. We've known each other since our early 20s, met through the construction industry, and there is no one on earth whose judgment or loyalty I trust more. I called him. Told him everything. His response was measured and precise. Don't confront her. Not yet. Not until you have everything you need. I already knew that. But hearing him say it out loud made it real. I also called my older sister Claire. She is the most organized, most methodical person in my family and the only person besides Weston who would keep this information contained. Claire's response was immediate and practical. Start documenting now. So I did. Over the next 6 weeks, while presenting myself as a man dealing with a stressful work period, slightly distant, a little quieter than usual, nothing alarming, I built a record. Call logs, screenshots of her phone background left visible once while she showered. Physical notes of dates, times, behaviors I observed. I am not going to pretend this felt noble. It felt necessary. I also did other things during those 6 weeks. I contacted a divorce attorney. I want to be clear that I did this before I had fully decided what I was going to do, because a conversation with a lawyer is free and knowing your legal position before you need it is just common sense. Ohio is a no-fault divorce state, but marital misconduct is relevant to asset division and spousal support determinations. I paid attention to what he told me. I quietly separated my personal financial contributions from our joint accounts. This was done carefully and legally. I'm not suggesting anyone drain a shared account without understanding the implications. I opened an individual account I'd never had before and started routing appropriate funds there. Nothing dramatic, just preparation. I found an apartment, a 2-bedroom in a complex about 12 minutes from the house, far enough to be a clean break, close enough that sharing school pickups for Harper would be workable. I didn't sign the lease yet. I just found it, and I started documenting something specific that I'll come back to. January came. Lee's behavior had shifted again. She was warmer with me, more attentive, the way people sometimes become when guilt starts pressing on them from the inside. She suggested we take the girls skiing over President's Day weekend like we'd been talking about for years. I agreed. We went. I was present for every moment of that trip because my daughters deserved a father who was present, and because I had gotten very good at operating in 2 parallel registers at once. On the surface, husband, father, normal man on a ski vacation, underneath, collecting information with the patience of someone who has stopped being in a hurry. The coward had texted her 14 times during the 4 days we were in Vermont. I know because I had, by then, found a way to see what I needed to see. I won't say more than that. The specific documentation I mentioned was this. I had identified 7 people in Lee's circle who I believed were either aware of the affair or would be significantly affected by learning about it. Her sister, who was also her closest friend. Her mother. 2 of her work colleagues who reported directly to her and who I suspected covered for her schedule. Her mentor. A woman who had championed Lee's career for a decade and who Lee publicly credited with shaping her professional values. The coward's direct supervisor at the healthcare network, and the coward's sister, who had attended our wedding and sent us Christmas cards for years. I'm a project manager by training. I manage complex timelines with multiple dependencies, and I do not miss details. What I built over those weeks was not a folder of screenshots. It was a structured record. A timeline with corresponding evidence for each entry, cross-referenced and coherent. Something a person could sit down with and understand completely without me in the room to explain it. I made 7 copies. I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you about February 1st. February is when I confirmed what I needed to confirm. I had suspected but not proven that they'd been meeting at his apartment in the Short North neighborhood. Suspicion isn't proof. One Tuesday evening, Lee told me she had a late working dinner with her team. I told her that sounded exhausting and I hoped it went well. Then I drove to his building. Her car was in the lot. I sat there for 11 minutes. Not because I needed more time to accept it. I had accepted it months ago in that kitchen with the coffee. I sat there because I wanted to be completely certain that when I remembered this moment, and I knew I would remember it for the rest of my life, I would know that I had looked at it directly. I didn't flinch from it. I drove home, put my daughters to bed, and sent Weston a text that said simply, confirmed. That night I signed the lease on the apartment. Over the next 3 weeks, I began moving what mattered. Not furniture. Not obvious things. My grandfather's toolbox, the external hard drive with our tax records and family photos, irreplaceable documents, my fishing gear, things that wouldn't be noticed missing until they were very much gone. Weston helped me on 2 Saturday afternoons when Lee and the girls were out. Claire held some things at her house. The divorce paperwork was prepared and waiting with my attorney by March 1st. March 15th was our anniversary, 20 years since our first date at that cookout in Columbus. It fell on a Wednesday. Lee made a reservation at the restaurant where I proposed, a nice Italian place downtown that we've been going to for special occasions for 15 years. She wore the dress I'd always loved on her. She was warm and open and present in a way she hadn't been in months, and I understood why. She had ended things with the coward in early March. I know the exact date because I had still been watching. She had decided to try to save the marriage without telling me there was anything to save it from. We had a lovely dinner. I held her hand across the table. I ordered her a glass of the Barolo she liked. I said the right things. I looked her in the eyes. 2 days later, I sent the packages. Not boxes, not envelopes. I had 7 identical padded mailers, each containing a printed document, 32 pages, organized into sections with a brief explanatory cover note. Clear, factual, unemotional. The tone of a project report. Every relevant date, every piece of supporting evidence presented without editorializing. The cover note simply said, I thought you should have accurate information. Her sister received one, her mother, her 2 colleagues, her mentor, the coward's supervisor, the coward's sister. I dropped all 7 at the post office on a Thursday morning with 2-day delivery. Then I went to work. I ran a site meeting. I approved a materials order. I called my attorney and told him to file. I went home that evening and made dinner for my daughters. I helped Harper with a history project. I watched half a movie with Zoe. Normal evening. The last normal evening in that house. That night, after both girls were asleep, I packed my 2 bags. I'd been preparing them piece by piece for weeks. Loaded them into my truck, wrote a letter and left it on the kitchen table and drove to my apartment. I want to tell you about the letter because I know people wonder about these moments. It wasn't long. It wasn't cruel. I told her I knew and had known for months. I told her the paperwork had been filed. I told her where to reach my attorney. I told her that whatever happened next between us legally, she was the mother of our daughters, and I would conduct myself accordingly. That was all. I didn't perform grief on paper. I didn't beg. I didn't threaten. By Friday morning, the mailers had arrived. I know this because her sister called me at 8:47 a.m. I let it go to voicemail. She called 3 more times before noon. Lee called 11 times between 9 a.m. and 2 p.m. I had blocked her on every platform. Not out of cruelty, but because I had nothing to say to her that wasn't going to be said through an attorney. The voicemails were full by Saturday. Weston sent me updates through that weekend because we had two mutual friends who were, in real time, watching Lee's world react to the information I'd sent. Her sister had confronted her Friday afternoon. That conversation, from what I was told, lasted 3 hours and did not end well. Her mother had called her mentor before calling Lee, which tells you something. The coward's supervisor had apparently placed him on administrative leave by Friday afternoon, pending an internal HR review. The healthcare network had a conflict of interest policy regarding relationships between leadership levels, and the documentation I'd provided was thorough enough to make the case clearly. The coward's sister apparently sent Lee a message that I was told was not gentle. I am not going to pretend I felt nothing about this. I felt something. I would call it grim satisfaction. Not pleasure in anyone's pain, but the specific feeling of a man who has been lied to for a long time, watching the lies stop being something only he carries. That feeling is real, and I will not apologize for it. The harder thing was my daughters. I had told Zoe the weekend before. She was 19, home from her first year of college. I asked her to meet me at the coffee shop near the house. Neutral ground, public enough that neither of us would fall completely apart. I gave her the version of the truth that was honest without being a weapon. Your mother and I are getting divorced. There are serious reasons. I'm not going to detail them for you, but I'm not going to lie to you either. She's still your mother. I told her where I'd be living and that she had a room there whenever she needed it. Zoe cried. I held her hand across the table. I did not cry in the coffee shop, though I did in my truck afterward. Then I stopped and started the engine. Harper was harder because Harper was 15, and 15 is its own particular kind of fragile. I told her together with Lee at the house, 4 days after I left. That was the only time I was in the same room as my wife between the night I drove away and our first legal meeting. Harper asked if it was her fault. I told her clearly and immediately that it was not, that nothing about this was about her, that both her parents loved her without reservation. Lee said the same thing. In that moment, side by side on the couch for our daughter's sake, whatever I felt about Lee as my wife was completely irrelevant. The legal process took 8 months. I won't walk you through all of it because it was tedious and painful in the specific administrative way that divorce is tedious and painful. What I will tell you is that Ohio's consideration of marital misconduct and spousal support determinations was relevant to our case, and my documentation was relevant to that. My attorney is good at his job. We reached a settlement that was fair. I sold my half of the house to Lee. She's still there with Harper, which was the right outcome. Harper's school, her friends, her life are all in that neighborhood. I have no interest in uprooting my 15-year-old to satisfy my own feelings about a building. The cabin I had on a lake in southern Ohio stayed with me. The coward, from what I've heard through people we both know, was quietly let go from the healthcare network 2 months after the HR review. He has since moved to another city. I have no further interest in him. There is someone in my life now. I'll call her Mara. We've known each other for 6 years. She ran the electrical subcontractor on a project I managed in 2018, and we've been in the same professional orbit since. She went through her own divorce 3 years ago, a fact I knew peripherally but had never discussed in detail. She reached out to me in the fall, after word had gotten around in our professional circle that I was going through mine. Coffee turned into a long dinner. A long dinner turned into a conversation that lasted until the restaurant closed. She is steady and honest, and she talks to me like I'm a full person, which sounds like a low bar, but I promise you it isn't. We're taking it slowly. That's the right speed. I want to tell you where I actually am now. 8 months since I drove away from that house with 2 bags, because I think this part matters. I spent a long time believing that the right response to what happened was to become harder. Less trusting, more closed. My father's flat expression and steady hands taken to their logical extreme. A man who doesn't need anyone doesn't risk anything, doesn't leave himself open again. I understand that impulse. I understand exactly why the mind reaches for it. But my youngest daughter asked me something at dinner a few months ago. This 15-year-old who has been navigating more than she should have to at her age. She asked me if I was okay. Not the way kids sometimes ask that question when they're really asking for reassurance. She looked at me across the table and asked it like she actually wanted to know. And I realized something in that moment. Closing off completely would not protect her from anything. It would just model for her a particular version of surviving that I don't actually want her to inherit. So I am not fully healed. I don't think healing from 21 years is something that has a finish line. But I am functional. I am present for my daughters, I am doing honest work, and I have people around me who deserve the real version of me. not the armored version. I'm not going to wrap this up with a list of lessons because I'm not a self-help book and my life is not a parable. But I will say this to whoever needs to hear it. The hardest part of what I did wasn't the logistics. It wasn't the legal process or the moving boxes or the paperwork. It was the months in between. The months of watching and knowing and saying nothing. Of sitting with the truth alone while the life I thought I had continued to run in front of me like a projection. That was the hardest part. And I don't regret it, not because I enjoyed it, because I came out the other side of it knowing that when everything fell apart, I had handled my own situation with as much clarity and intention as I was capable of. That belongs to me. Nobody can take it. The packages arrived on a Friday morning. By Friday afternoon, the stories she'd been telling about her life no longer held its shape. By the time the weekend was over, the only narrative left was the true one. That's enough. That's where I needed to land, if you're in the middle of it right now. If you're the person reading this at 2 a.m. trying to figure out which end is up, I want you to hear this clearly. Protect yourself first. Talk to a lawyer before you think you need one. Talk to someone you trust. One person, someone with a closed mouth. Document what you see. Don't move until you're ready to move completely. And know that the other side of this exists. I'm standing in it. It doesn't look like what I pictured when I was 23 and in love at a cookout in Columbus. But it's real and it's mine. And most days, that's more than enough. I've had a lot of time to sit with everything that happened. More time than I expected, honestly. Because I thought once the legal part was done and the apartment was set up and life had moved into its new shape, the thinking about it would slow down. It didn't slow down for a while. That's something nobody tells you. The logistics end before the processing does. What I kept coming back to in those first months wasn't what Lee did. I understood what she did. People make choices that damage other people. That's not a mystery. What I kept coming back to was what I almost did instead. There were at least 4 moments between December 2022 and March 2023 where I almost walked into the kitchen and just said I know. Just said it out loud and let whatever was going to happen start happening. And I understand why a person does that. The weight of knowing alone is genuinely terrible. There's a particular loneliness in it that I don't think I could fully describe to someone who hasn't been there. But I didn't. I waited. And I want to be honest about why. It wasn't patience in the noble sense. It wasn't some higher wisdom I'd arrived at. It was that I had watched enough situations in my professional life, long complicated projects with bad actors and high stakes, to understand that the person who moves before they're ready almost always hands the advantage to someone else. What I had in those months of waiting was not peace. It was preparation. There's a difference. The thing about acting with intention rather than reaction is that you end up owning the outcome in a way you don't if you just blow up. I blew up nothing. I built something, a documented, factual, coherent account of what had actually happened, and then I placed it in the hands of the people who deserve to have accurate information. That distinction mattered to me then, and it still matters to me now. I wasn't performing pain. I wasn't making a scene. I was correcting a false record. And then I left. Lee is a smart woman. She built a real career. She's a capable mother. None of that changed because of what she did. But somewhere in the years we spent together, she made a series of small decisions that led to a large one. And the large one had a logic to it that I think she understood even before I sent those envelopes. Actions produce outcomes. That's not a philosophical concept. It's just how things work. She chose what she chose, and the outcomes followed. The mentor who lost respect for her, the colleagues who now saw her differently, the HR process that the coward walked into, none of that came from nowhere. What I took from all of it, the whole 18 months from that December afternoon in the kitchen to sitting in my apartment on the lake watching the water, is that clarity is something you build, not something that arrives. I had to build mine slowly, carefully, in the middle of a life that was still running as if everything was fine. And that required a kind of discipline I didn't know I had. I'm not saying that proudly. I'm saying it because if you're in the middle of something like this right now, you might need to hear that the discipline is available to you even when everything inside you wants to just react. It's there. It takes intention to find it. My daughter Harper asked me if I was okay a few months back. I told her the truth mostly. That's the honest answer. Mostly is enough. Mostly is what forward looks like.